Stay with me. Welcome to Storyvale. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Now let's dive into today's story. The restaurant was busy, the lunch hour chaos in full swing, but no one noticed Amara until a group of boys decided to humiliate her, and she showed them that strength doesn't always shout. She moved through the chaos like it belonged to someone else, untouched, unshaken, calm, deliberate, and aware of everything around her. But to understand her, you need to know where she came from. The wind whipped through the city streets, carrying sounds of cars and distant laughter. But Amara felt nothing. She walked calmly, her dark skin glowing under the weak sunlight, her steps quiet but deliberate. Some people glanced at her and quickly looked away, as if they had sensed that something about her was different, something they couldn't name. Some storms are quiet, and some people are quiet storms. Amara was one of them. She had not always been a quiet storm. Once, she had lived in a world that was loud, where power spoke and people obeyed. She had been surrounded by gold, guarded by men who looked like statues, watched over by cameras that never slept. She had been a child in a home where doors opened with a knock of her finger, where voices lowered at her name. But she had left all of it behind. She had been adopted by Grace, a woman whose name made people tremble. Grace ran a family feared by many. Some whispered about them in the dark. Some prayed she never noticed them. But Grace had loved Amara, not as a child to a parent, but as a force she knew could one day change the world if she chose. Amara grew up knowing two things. One, power is a weapon, and two, the world is cruel. But she also learned that kindness and strength could exist together, quietly, without boasting. She had learned patience, the art of waiting, and the skill of observing. When Amara turned 18, she walked away. No guards, no money, no name. She wanted a life of her own, a life where she was treated like a human, not a force to fear. She wanted her strength to mean something different, something she could choose to show or choose not to. Years later, she found herself working in a small, busy restaurant. The city moved fast around her. Plates clinked, people laughed, and the smell of food filled the air. Amara moved like she belonged to the rhythm of the place. She served tables. She cleaned floors. She smiled politely. She observed everyone, always calm, always alert. And then the day came that would test everything she had chosen to be. The restaurant doors slammed open, louder than the lunch hour chatter. A group of young white boys entered, laughing too loudly, their shoes clicking sharply on the floor. They were messy, chaotic, and loud. The moment they saw Amara, they began pointing, whispering, and mocking her appearance. Amara kept her hands steady. She ignored the words, like water sliding off smooth stone. But the laughter grew sharper, crueler. One of them knocked a chair over deliberately. Another whispered something cruel that made his friend snicker. Then one boy, bolder than the rest, grabbed a bowl of hot soup from a table and poured it on the floor in front of her. The soup spread quickly, sticky and hot. The boy grinned wickedly. "Lick it," he said loudly, "or we won't pay." The restaurant froze. Customers stopped chewing. Forks hung in the air. Eyes widened. Everyone expected her to break, to cry, to beg. But Amara did not. She bent down, quietly picked up a cloth, and wiped the floor slowly. Her movements were calm, controlled, deliberate. Then, just as they thought she had submitted, she tipped the same bowl back toward their table. Soup flew, soaking their phones, their drinks, their clothes. Silence. Amara's eyes met theirs. Her voice was soft but firm. "I guess someone needs a lesson in manners." Before they could react, her phone buzzed. A quick call. Then the sound of engines outside. Black cars, shiny and intimidating, stopped at the curb. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Tall, quiet, serious. The boys froze. Their laughter died. Their fear replaced it instantly. The manager rushed over to Amara. She simply smiled, wiped her apron, and said, "They're already charged. Full meal plus damages." The room erupted in murmurs and stifled laughter. The boys were lifted into the black cars, humiliated and terrified. Customers whispered and pointed. Amara went back to work. Calm, dignified, untouchable. Amara went back to work, dignified, untouchable. She wiped her apron carefully, her hands steady as if nothing had happened. The customers stared, whispering among themselves. Some laughed softly, unable to hide their amazement. Some shook their heads in disbelief. But no one dared speak to her. The manager came over, clearing his throat. His eyes were wide, a mix of fear and awe. "Amara, I don't know what to say," he stammered. She smiled politely, just a small curve of her lips, and said, "Nothing needs to be said. Work continues." And so it did. Plates were cleared. Orders were taken. Drinks refilled. The restaurant returned to its rhythm, but the memory of what had just happened lingered like a shadow over every table. Amara moved gracefully, serving meals with the same calm she had always carried. Her mind, however, was far from calm. She thought about the boys, their faces red with embarrassment, their screams fading as the black cars carried them away. She thought about the families that would be furious, about the power she had quietly summoned with a single phone call. The restaurant door opened again, this time with less drama. A man in a plain suit stepped inside. He looked around briefly before his gaze settled on Amara. His eyes were sharp, observant. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and walked to a table at the corner. Amara felt a flicker of tension but kept moving. She served him with her usual politeness, placing the plate down without a tremor. "You handle that very well," he said quietly, his voice low, but carrying an authority that made the air feel heavier. "I did what needed to be done," Amara replied softly, keeping her tone even. He nodded again and left after finishing his meal, leaving her with the uneasy feeling that the world she had built quietly for herself was no longer entirely safe. When her shift ended, Amara walked to the door and paused. The street outside looked normal, busy with cars and people hurrying along. But she sensed eyes on her. Not curious eyes, but careful, calculating ones. Somewhere, the boys' families were already asking questions. Somewhere, people were learning that Amara was not just another server. She was someone who commanded respect. And respect, when ignored, demanded consequences. Amara walked home slowly, feeling the weight of her choice. She had left her family to live her own life, and now, in the quiet aftermath of that storm, she understood something important. Her past could follow her quietly like a shadow. She could not ignore it forever. Inside her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the ceiling. She was calm, collected, untouchable, yes, but she also knew the next challenge was already coming. And when it did, she would have to be ready. Amara smiled faintly to herself. Life had a way of testing people. But she had learned long ago that storms did not announce themselves. They moved quietly, and when they struck, they left marks no one could forget. The next morning, Amara could no longer hold back how she was feeling. She had gone home after her shift, exhausted but calm, telling herself that what had happened yesterday was over. The boys had been taken away, carried off by the black cars, and she didn't know where they had gone. She didn't even care to know all the details. But a part of her worried. Not for herself, she was untouchable, but for the lesson she had intended them to learn. She wanted to make sure they had understood it, that they would never forget it. That respect was not something to mock, to ignore, or to trample on someone else's dignity. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. The quiet room felt too small. Her hands, resting on her knees, twitched with a faint impatience. She could feel the tension in her chest, the calm she usually carried breaking into something more restless. Finally, she picked up her phone. It was an old, simple device, nothing fancy, but it held power far beyond its appearance. She dialed the numbers she knew by heart. A few quick words were exchanged. Then she hung up. A short time later, the engines roared outside. Black cars, sleek and silent, came to a stop in front of the small building where she rented her room. Men stepped out, tall and serious, their faces unreadable. They had come not to punish, not to intimidate, but to do exactly what she had asked. Minutes later, the boys were brought back. Their hair was messy, their expensive clothes slightly torn, and their faces pale. They looked around, confused and scared, as the men quietly set them down on the sidewalk. The world they had believed they controlled had disappeared. Amara stood at the window of her room, watching. She didn't go outside. She didn't shout. She simply looked. And as the boys scrambled into the city streets, muttering apologies in fear, she felt the quiet satisfaction. The lesson had been delivered. Precisely, calmly, and without unnecessary cruelty. For a long time, she just watched the cars drive away. She felt the city breathe around her, the usual chaos of the streets, but everything seemed sharper now, more focused. Power was not loud, she realized. It was quiet. It was subtle. It could move through shadows and walls and still be felt. And in that moment, Amara understood something deeply. The world might see her as a small, ordinary woman working in a restaurant. But her choices, her calm, her control, they made her far more dangerous than anyone imagined. She sat back on the bed, closed her eyes, and allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The boys had learned their lesson. And the world, in its own way, was beginning to understand that Amara was not someone to be underestimated. Amara returned to the restaurant that afternoon. The air was calm, the customers chatting quietly, the smell of food filling the space as if nothing had happened the day before. But everything had changed. Every glance, every whispered comment carried a new weight. People saw her differently now, not just as a server, but as someone who commanded respect without raising her voice. The manager approached her again, this time with a careful smile. "Amara," he said softly, I don't know how you did it, but thank you. I've never seen anything like it." She smiled politely and shook her head. "I did what had to be done," she said simply. No more, no less. Throughout her shift, she moved among the tables with her usual grace, carrying trays and refilling drinks. Customers stole glances at her, some in awe, some in curiosity. She did not seek attention. She did not need it. Her quiet confidence spoke louder than any words could. As the sun began to set, Amara walked home slowly. The streets were filled with the sounds of the city, but she felt a calm she had not felt in years. She knew the boys had returned to their lives, likely shaken and wiser, and she had learned something herself. Power and strength were not about fear or wealth. They were about choices. They were about knowing when to act and when to wait. That night, she sat by the window of her small room, looking out at the city lights. She thought about her past, the life she had left behind, the family she had chosen to separate herself from, and the lessons Grace had taught her. She realized that freedom was not just living on your own. It was the ability to shape the world around you without losing yourself. Amara finally understood that true strength did not need to be shown to everyone. It was quiet, steady, and unwavering. It could protect, could correct, and it could teach without ever needing to shout. She closed her eyes and let herself smile. Life was unpredictable, and the world would always test her, but she had learned a truth that could not be taken away. Dignity, patience, and courage were more powerful than fear or force. The next morning, she woke up with the same calm determination she had always carried. The restaurant would open. People would come and go. But Amara would move through the world as she always had, quietly strong, respectfully fearless, and entirely herself. And the lesson she left behind, for everyone who watched or remembered, was clear. Strength is not in the power you wield, but in the calm with which you choose to use it. Respect is earned, not demanded. And sometimes, the quietest storms leave the deepest marks. Amara smiled, feeling the weight of the lesson in her chest, light and steady. The world kept moving around her, but she had found her own rhythm, and no one could ever take that away. The storm had passed, and she had won. If you love Amara's story and want to see more exciting, suspenseful, and powerful stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Drop a comment below and tell us what lesson you learned from Amara's strength. Do you think you could stay calm and strong like her in a tough situation? And don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. It helps us bring even more stories that inspire and entertain you. Your next favorite story could be just a click away. So subscribe now and join the adventure.